Testing. Okay, now we got it. Can everybody hear me okay? Good morning. Welcome to Eyes to See and Ears to Hear. This is our conversation and meditation on great art. I have one more handout, Susan. So as we've done before, there will be, so let me start by saying again, I'm Ken Junkins, and in your handout, we look at the schedule over the next several weeks. Of course, we've got Easter, Palm Sunday and Easter coming up, the chili cook-off. So we are intermittent here with this class until, we'll just work it out until we get through it all. So I'm Ken Junkins, and this is Eyes to See, Ears to Hear. This is, let's see, Vince, can we get the screen back up there? It's on, yeah. Good morning. Here we go, Eyes to See, Ears to Hear, and there we go. Group meditation on great paintings. And this week, This week, the keyboard is going to... Might have to do that. Let's see. That's true. Maybe the battery's low in the keyboard, but it was working, so... It was working good. I feel special now that I'm using Bruce's microphone. Okay. You've got it just the way you want it. All right, so before I show it on the screen, I'll read the text. This comes from Genesis 9, verse 11 to 17. I establish my covenant with you that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood. And never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. God said, this is the sign of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations. I have set my bow in the clouds, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth, and the bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant that is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and the waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh that is on earth. So we'll read it again. I establish my covenant with you, that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. God said, this is the sign of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you, for all future generations. I have set my bow in the clouds, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth, and the bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant that is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and the waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth. So, what are our thoughts or feelings about this text, this passage in Genesis? It's comforting. In what way?
Well, you frequently see a rainbow in Florida, and it just brings you right back to these types of passages where you know you're safe if you believe.
There is a comfort in it, yeah. And it is a reminder of God's covenant with us, yeah.
And the part that says, will not destroy all flesh, because we see terrible floods, but we know that it's not going to end everything.
Yeah. Yep, and it also reminds us that, God is on our side, right? I liked Bruce's sermon today where he talked about, that things that are bad that happen are not necessarily a judgment on us, right? So God is no longer just deciding, I'm going to wipe everything out and start all over again. He's made that promise with us. What's that? God's original artwork, that's right. Yeah, there's a lot of beauty in nature, and that rainbow, really highlights that beauty. Our second text. So when we had Don's class on Presbyterianism, we talked about the book of Confessions and some of the confessions that are in here. And this is part of our Reformed tradition. The second text comes from the Heidelberg Catechism. And the Heidelberg Catechism is set up in a way where questions are asked and then answered to help us understand our faith, our Reformed tradition. So question number 52 in the Heidelberg Catechism says, how does Christ's return to judge the living and the dead comfort you? And the answer in the Catechism is, in all distress and persecution, with uplifted head, I confidently await the very judge who has already offered himself to the judgment of God in my place and removed the whole curse from me. Christ will cast all his enemies and mine into everlasting condemnation, but will take me and all his chosen ones to himself into the joy and glory of heaven. We'll read it again. The question is, how does Christ's return to judge the living and the dead comfort you? In all distress and persecution, with uplifted head, I confidently await the very judge who has already offered himself to the judgment of God in my place and removed the whole curse from me. Christ will cast his enemies and mine into everlasting condemnation, but will take me and his chosen ones to himself into the joy and glory of heaven. So what are our feelings about this passage, about this text? Much the same way as the previous text, I feel comfort in that. Again, we know of God's promises to us, and that Jesus died for us and for our sins, and that we don't face a judgment because Christ died for us. So we're included whether we're still living or have already died. So this is a new covenant, and in our Reformed tradition, we understand that the judgment of us is handled differently, and that Christ has died for our sins. So, prior to the Reformation, the Christian view of judgment was a very harsh one, right? And we're going to show a picture here by an artist, Hieronymus Bosch. Oh, back up one. Can you back up? There it is. So in the church, in the early church, the 1400s, when the artists were decorating the church, they would, we know the Sistine Chapel, ceilings, frescoes on the walls, etc. There's also triptychs that were often done, 3-paneled paintings of scenes. And this is one done by Hieronymus Bosch in about 1500. So it's hard to see on the screen, which is why the handout is very helpful. But even so, some of the smaller stuff is hard to see. So let's talk a little bit about what do we see. There's 3 panels. Let's talk a little bit about the left-hand panel first. What do we see in the left-hand panel? Adam and Eve. God in the clouds, yes. What else is in the clouds there? Yeah, it's difficult to see in this image, but there are angels in the clouds, and the ones that are closer to God are light in color, and the ones that are falling from the clouds are those that are cast out of heaven. They're dark and insect-like. So it's a very pastoral scene. The Garden of Eden, I would suppose, but in the picture, there's 3 things below on the earth that are depicted there. Let's look at the one in the most foreground there. On the ground is a man lying down, a woman kneeling, and then someone dressed in robes lifting her up. In the middle ground there are a man and a woman walking past a tree that is full of fruit, right? And there's some entity in the tree leaning out, handing something to them. I think if we looked closely, it would be an apple. And then in the background there is someone in a robe holding a sword. I know it's very difficult to see. And chasing the other two into the forest. So that's pretty much the story of Adam and Eve, right? Eve was created from Adam's rib in the story by God, and then they were tempted by Satan with the fruit of the tree of knowledge, and then they were chased out of Eden. Right? Let's look at the middle panel now. What do we see there? Again, it's little and a little difficult to see. What's up at the top? Heaven. Angels, yep. So there's, again, dressed in that red robe, sitting on although it's not colorful, it's a bow, a rainbow, or a bow, a throne of heaven. Surrounded by, those are the saints in heaven, but surrounded by people, and up higher up is a woman on the left and a man on the right. We'll talk about who they are, and angels, then you said. And then below that, we see a crazy scene with a lot going on. Say again? World's gone wrong, yeah. And the right panel also shows some of that. But, you know, there are flames coming up out of the earth. There are machines that are grinding people up, and spears going through people. And what's that? A cage, yeah. A big knife. There are, monsters and all sorts of horrible things. So there's a lot to be discovered in these pictures, and again, I apologize that this is so small for you to look at, even on the screen. It's because it's far away, but when we look at this picture, what do we feel? So you made a face, and I think, yeah, unrest, hatred, tragedy, pardon me? Hope. And where do we see hope? Where do we feel hope in this? Promise of heaven, yeah. It is like heaven and hell. It is like heaven and hell. This painting is called The Last Judgment. And so, of course, we're shown the story of Adam and Eve and them being cast out of Eden for disobeying God. And then we see Christ and the saints and the angels, and it's to our left is Mary, and to our right is John the Baptist, the evangelist there. So the saints are surrounding Christ in heaven, and that is what we aspire to be part of. But, we're sinners on earth, and all manner of tragedy. This is pre-Reformation. all manner of horrible, horrible judgment is going to be upon us, where, monsters plague us, and, we're speared and ground up and put in cages and tortured. Horrible, horrible, horrible things.
The fact that the angels have trumpets, makes them herald angels. So is that significant, rather than just being angels?
I think it is. So that the fact that they have trumpets, they are announcing the glory of heaven and calling to us, possibly, right? The angels on the left-hand side there, one of them has put down the horn and they're having a conversation. So they are maybe, looking or thinking about those who are following God and Christ and coming into heaven.
I think it's interesting that there are 12 saints.
Oh yeah, 12 saints, that's good. Yeah. What? Why would that be? 12 disciples. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. Yeah. So biblically, after Judas betrayed Christ, there was another, in the book of Acts, I believe, maybe Bruce could tell me, I don't know. I believe there was another apostle that was brought into the group. So the pre-Reformation view of the Last Judgment is pretty dire, pretty dark, right? This is the type of paintings that Hieronymus Bosch did frequently with monsters and devils, surrounding us and tricking us and doing horrible things to us. Can we change to the next picture?
Can I just ask one more question?
Yes.
And you don't have to go back, but is there a reason in the text description of this why there is no heaven in the third painting? There is no heaven depicted in the third painting.
That's a good observation. Yeah. And on the side of the center painting, on the left-hand side, heaven is more open up to the idyllic Eden image, and it's closed off on the right-hand side towards the more hellish region too. I don't have an answer, but yeah. So the next picture then is also by Hieronymus Bosch. It was done towards the end of his life, and you'll notice that it's dated 1514, which is just before Martin Luther publishes his theses in 1517, all right? So we're still, the Christian church is still, pre-Reformation and pre-thinking about all this judgment that God has. So these are two panels of another triptych that he did. The left one is called Hell, and the right one is called The Flood. So what do we see here? Let's look at the left side. What's that? Flying animals, flying creatures. It's painted in very dark colors, isn't it? And what is colorful is red, almost like flame or fire, right? Creatures are cowering. People are cowering. They're dark and dismal. And let's look at the other picture then, which is called the flood. What do we see there? Animals. Yeah. What's that? Bodies. Yeah. So animals, so there's a ship. There's people on the ship. They're holding open a door. The animals are processing out of the ship, the boat, right? These are the animals that Noah saved. They're marching out into the earth now. And what they're encountering in the foreground are the bodies of the drowned and dead. Right? God sent the flood to destroy the world, saved Noah. Noah, listened to God's commandment and put animals on the boat. And so when they landed,
The only bright color is the dove up in the upper right.
yeah. It's also a very dark and dismal image of a post-judgmental world, post-judgment world, right? Yes, Peggy said, we almost want to stay on the boat. That might be a good idea, right? So very dark and dismal images of what God's judgment for us will be. So then about 400 or so years later, in the 1800s and 1900s, we have artists now that are they're more representational of the life that they see around them, brighter colors. We've seen some of these paintings and the way people are representing things. And Wassily Kandinsky comes along and starts thinking about emotions. So what we're going to see in a minute is a painting about, so it's called, I lost the word, abstract expressionism, okay? So this school of painting is abstract. It's not concrete painting. There are not things in it that you would necessarily pick out. And it's about an expression of emotion. So I'm going to ask you our questions, what do you see? And then I'm going to ask, what do you feel? You're going to have a lot more to say about what you feel, I think, than what you see. And by the way, I think it's oriented horizontally, this picture, when we see it. So if we can see the next picture. This is Wassily Kandinsky's painting on the theme of the Last Judgment, painted in 1912. What do we see? Bobby sees the Garden of Eden. And was it Bert? Color? Color. Colored eggs. Oyster shell. A snake. So there is a lot of color in this, and in contrast to Hieronymus Bosch's painting, it's a much brighter image, right? Color and shape. The center area looks like
Pit, where somebody could fall in and die.
a pit. Okay. So what do we feel when we see a picture like this? Say again? Confusion? More cheerful? What's that? Spring. So a feeling of renewth and rebirth. Easter. Mm-hmm. What? False eyelashes. Yeah. Yeah, I've looked at some other of Kandinsky's paintings and also some of why is his name the mustache guy in Tampa? Dali. Some of Dali's paintings that are kind of between abstract expressionism and surrealism also have that sort of eyelashy kind of feel to them too. What do we wonder about this painting? What's that, Bert? Color and shape, yeah. Yeah. Well, so if we think about that this is, Kandinsky was a pioneer of abstract expressionism, and he developed this whole school of painting like this. If you look at his earlier paintings, they're more representational. You will see buildings and people and things. And then he was in this middle period where he was totally thinking about expressing his emotions. And he also was interested in, let me find the piece of paper now, where'd that go? I want to say, Christian eschatology at the time. Mr. Pastor Bruce, could you define what Christian eschatology is? Very good. The study of the end times. So Kandinsky was interested in this, and a lot of his paintings were about the flood, the Last Judgment, etc. But he wanted to paint them as an expression, as almost as music on paper, an expression of his feelings. So he's not really putting down concrete images. He's putting down color and movement and emotion. So when we look at a painting like this, we're not looking necessarily to find a snake or an eyelash or an egg. We're looking to understand what his emotions were. And if he called this the Last Judgment, how do you think he feels? How do you think he's expressing his feelings about the Last Judgment? I'm sorry, Peggy?
Positive.
Positive? Good?
Pleasant.
Pleasant, yeah. Bright and cheery. Renewal, springtime, right? Hopeful.
I wonder if the egg shapes, though, do mean something like what's going to come out of them, what's going to grow out of it.
Growth also is an observation.
Growth.
What about promise?
Promise.
I see a face in that little green teapot thing.
Mm-hmm.
Does it feel like floating?
Yeah. Also think about this. All the colors of God's rainbow are here. They're not in the order that we expect to see them. We do have a bowing motion in there. But God's covenant promise to us was, to never again destroy the whole world. So if this is called the Last Judgment, this is not about destruction. death, annihilation. This is about the promise of what comes after. It's abstract expressionisms. So it's not representational, but if that's what you're feeling coming out of it, then that's what it is. So it's how you interpret something that's abstract like that. So let's look at the next one, also by Kandinsky, called Improvisation Deluge. So what do we see here? So again, we see the colors of the rainbow. There are a lot of bright colors in there, but there's also, in contrast, some dark blues and blacks. Do you see a lot more motion in this than the previous painting? There was motion somewhat in the previous painting. So then because this is abstract expressionism, we're going to move from what do we see, because we don't see a lot of concrete images that we can attach to. We're going to say, what do we feel when we see this? Disorder and confusion. Shades of life. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is a sort of a feeling of something above us is trying to reach us or guide us, right? Like rays of the sun. A rainbow, yeah. All the colors of the rainbow are there, and again, not necessarily in the order we expect them. Very abstract.
The definition of improvisation, and one of the definitions is created without preparation.
Okay. A lot of Kandinsky's paintings were improvisation, and then something after that. So, yes, he painted with a lot of emotion and improvisation. He didn't plan out his painting. We looked at a couple sessions ago, we looked at the Guernica that Picasso painted. Very deliberate, straight lines, and put creatures, animals, people in specific places. That would have had to have, and it was very large, had to have been a very deliberate image that he created. Kandinsky sits down to paper with his oils or his acrylics or whatever he's painting with, and throws his emotion out on the paper. And the other part of this then is deluge. So it's improvisation deluge. What's a deluge? What's deluge mean? A flood, yeah. So he is emotionally expressing to us what the flood would be for him. So a lot of motion, a lot of turmoil, a lot of things going on at the same time. But at the same time, there is light from above, color of the rainbow, promise of heaven, promise of being saved from the deluge. So Kandinsky liked color a lot. He was also an art theorist. So in addition to the paintings that he has done and the school of abstract expressionism that he formed with others, he wrote a number of books on art theory and color theory and expression, and one of his treatises was called Concerning the Spiritual in Art. So he was very spiritually connected and inquisitive, and wanted to express that in his art. So knowing that, I think, helps us appreciate what he's put on paper. If you saw one of those paintings just in passing without any background, you might be attracted to the color, the motion. You might say, oh, I don't see a horse in there. I don't see, flowers or a tree or something like that, and dismiss it. But you can understand by understanding where he's coming from and expressing his both his emotions and his spirituality. You can look at those paintings and maybe feel a little bit about what he was feeling at the time that he was painting them. So, okay. Any thoughts or questions? Our next session, we'll get back to some more realistic paintings and some of the classics stories of biblical nature and stuff. So I don't think we delve too much more into abstract art. So I look forward to seeing you then. Thank you all very much.